that years ago I read Charles Frazier's follow-up to Cold Mountain, which was 13 Moons. And in that book, there are two love stories. There's the protagonist and there's a man and a woman have a love story, and that's all interesting. But the main thing that I really liked about the book was the love story between the protagonist and the land. And it's set from 1820 North Carolina through about 1900. So at the start, there are still wolves. There's still, I think buffalo have just been eradicated. And then through the book, you see the increasing destruction of the land until at the end, it's 1900. And he had this nice bit in there about how we evolved. It's as Lear Keith says that we're all born to be orphans. And we evolved to be able to hold in our hearts the the sorrow of losing grandparents and parents and lovers and friends. And if you're the last one standing, you've lost everybody by the end. And we evolved for a place with that. But through all of that change, what was normal in human existence was for your community to continue and for that community to include the forest, the river. So, yes, this person dies, that person dies, but the river, the salmon still run every fall. And yes, this tree may fall, that tree may fall, but through generation after generation after generation, the trees, the rivers, the soil, they're all going to be there for you. And there's no place in the heart to grieve that. Well, first off, there's no place in the heart to grieve these human losses when we don't have that non-human and also the larger human community continue the continuity of those others. And so like we're complete this is just yet another way that we are completely adrift and walking around as atomized individuals as opposed to smaller parts of larger communities. So that's the book I'm working on now. I'll be done with it. I'm really close to the end. Um,
Can I ask you a question about that,
sure.
Derek? I mean, I think part of what you're talking about is that we don't have ancestor worship rituals anymore. We've really let go of a lot of those ceremonies and ways of integrating ancestors into our everyday life. And I know that when I was living in Africa a long time ago in Kenya, I was living amongst the Giriama, and I had to walk a little ways into the village from where I was staying. So one day upon arrival, there was this like very shrill communal wailing, and someone had passed away. And the women of this small village called Shariani were assembled in a circle, and just, this forceful, deliberate wailing, communal wailing was taking place. And it really struck me like, oh, wow. So there's no opportunity here to avoid this grief or to not process. Like everything is structured in such a way that the processing and the social solidarity or support that is very important, all of this is structured in to this situation. And it was really something else, to as an American, we just don't have uh, these kinds of things built in.
Thank you for that. That reminds me of another story that uh, decades ago now, I interviewed Luis Rodriguez, who wrote Gang Days in LA, La Vida Loca. He was a gang member who got out through the literature revolution. And one of the questions I asked him was, why do so many kids stand on street corners shooting at mirror images of themselves?
Hmm.
And he said that part of the reason is that, and there are multiple reasons, but one of the reasons is that they are teenagers, and teenagers are supposed to want to die. And what they're not understanding is that that death is supposed to be spiritual and metaphorical. That that death is supposed to be the death of the child so the adult can emerge. And through our lives, we go through various deaths and rebirths. And because there's nobody there to tell, they get this impulse. And because there's nobody there to tell them, hey, this isn't supposed to be a physical death, they can misinterpret this this impulse. Um, and so shoot at mirror images themselves. And I think on a larger sense, and we can this may be too heavy to go too early, but um, I think that's one of the multiple reasons that this culture is killing the planet is that we recognize that this way of life has to end, and we don't understand that this we don't understand what should end, and we don't understand what the problem is, and so we end up killing everything about us, and that's facile, and there's a lot more to it than that, but I think that there is really something, and another thing that this all raises is that I think that I don't like the language of wired because that's machine language, but I'm going to use it here just so people can understand what I'm trying to talk about. I think humans made for is a better word than wired, or we evolved with. I think that we have a need for some sort of religion. And I think that it what I mean by that is that I love the line by there was this botanist in the 50s, I don't remember who said, nature's not only more complex than we think, it's more complex than we're capable of thinking. And I think that we need some sort of framework to put around that mystery. And I think, and sorry if we're going directions you don't want to go, and you can always rein me back in and point me a different direction. But I think I think a religion really should have a few purposes. One of them is to help us deal with the fact that we die. I think that that's one of the ways that religion emerged. And I have interesting conversations with I don't know what I am in terms of spirituality or what label I put on animist is the best I can think of. But I don't know what happens when we die is the point. And my mom didn't know. And I've had interesting discussions with atheists about this that, when my mom was dying, it's like I'm a pragmatist, and it's like anything to get me through that moment, anything to get her through that moment. And it's like that old line about there's no atheists in foxholes. As my mom's dying, I'm certainly glad to think that there is some sort of afterlife. And but so the point is, religion, one function would be to how uh to give us a framework for death. Another purpose of religion would be to teach us how to get along. And then another purpose of a religion would be to teach us how to get along with our land base. Obviously, a lot of sky god religions do that pretty poorly. And another part of religion would be to teach us how to experience what we can call the divine, or what we can also just call the magnificence of those questions that are because the universe is more complex than we're capable of thinking, and nature is more complex. So I think that I don't have a problem with religion if it's those four sort of frameworks. And the question is, how well does any religion fit those frameworks? How well does it teach you to get along with each other in
Right.
place? And any religion
Well, I think that
that would teach you the
institutionalized religion has power structures built in that make it instantly problematic, right?
of
They're
course.
usually connected up with some form of resources, some form of status, and so the whole thing unfolds in sometimes unfortunate ways. But I think, going back to your example of the teenagers on the street corner, I mean, I think that a spiritually empty existence leads to self-destructive behavior. So I think that what we're seeing now and is part of that, and the inability to get off of the gerbil wheel that is capitalism, is very um, is an escape from death, really, or from the confronting mortality. And I know I was there also with my father, took care of him for a while when he was passing, and it's actually such a special time. I mean, obviously, it depends on your relationship with the person, but that person returns, at least what I experience, is to their essential self, right? Maybe as they were as a child, like their very most simple tendencies tend to come out, and the kind of the most essential aspects of their personality. And it's not easy by any means, but there is something very sacred about it, closing that circle. And I think that's why, I'm very enthusiastic about death doulas and people who are trained to help people navigate that, um, because we should be deliberately, you know, focusing our attention on that phase of life. And if you believe in reincarnation, as I do, then it's not final, it's transitional, right? And like you were saying, these teenagers, what they were really trying to experience was a transition, and we don't honor our transitions sufficiently.
Right. Well, Derek, speaking of religion and spirituality, that dovetails with this modern interest now in the experience of awe. And there's a book out now called Awe, and there's research coming out of laboratories about the effects. You can actually produce awe in the laboratory with certain kinds of videos, and it's really fascinating. And have you been tracking this?
No, no, I haven't.
Yeah, you bring two groups of people into a laboratory setting, you show them different videos, a neutral video or one that has powerful nature scenes which reduce the significance of the viewer, reduce us to a smaller stature, if you will, and then they do character and personality testing, and it turns out that the people who have had these awe experiences become more pro-social. The inflammation in their bodies goes down. They become more interested in other people. They become more generous, and it's a really strong finding. So that just triggers all kinds of interest in me because I'm thinking, okay, living in prehistory in East Africa, for example, you would be in a state of awe quite a bit of your life because you would see the sunrise and the sunset every day. You would see animal dramas, all of that, all of the time, compared to now where we are basically awe deprived. And we seek out awe now in our devices and our screens and everything, but we're not getting it. So that seems to be maybe a path forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I have, so I didn't buy a cell phone until like 3 years ago. And the only reason I bought it is so I could listen to audiobooks. And I love listening to audiobooks. It's great. But like I was thinking about this last night, just like I think about this every single night, is that I was taking the dogs out for their final pee of the night, and I'm listening to a novel, and it's very interesting. And then I hear something way in the distance, so I turn the novel off, I put it on pause, and I realize again how ridiculous I'm being because I live in the most beautiful place in the world, and I'm listening to a novel instead of the wind blowing through the tops of the redwood trees. And I'm and as I was I and I'm not exaggerating with this, that I turn off the thing, and then I I look up and I notice that it's not cloudy, and I hadn't even noticed that the stars were in the sky until this was on my fourth dog. I've got four dogs, and three dogs. I'm listening to Bernie Gunther, the detective, as he's trying to figure out some crime, and then the fourth book finally I pay. Oh, it's like, and the I don't think that I have any more beloved sight in the world than the silhouettes of of coniferous trees against any sort of sky. I just I no matter what I'm doing, I am immediately happy. And um it was complete black, velvet black sky with bright stars uh against redwood trees. And I'd been trading that for re-listening to a novel I've already heard. And everything changed. And it so yes, I completely agree with one caveat. I just want to say this because this is a big deal in the 90s. In the 90s, there used to be this thought among environmentalists, if we could just get CEOs out into the forest just for a weekend, then everything would be fine. But um, the problem is deeper than that.
Right.
And but yeah, so back to the original thing. I there is uh yeah, I think there was this author, um if I remember her name later, I'll tell you. Anyway, there was this author who was writing over the last 30 years. Her big deal was that she believes we're ecstasy deprived, and that it's very interesting. You know, a lot of those cave paintings, she did not think were just sort of random drawings. She thought they were instruction manuals. And what they were was for poses that when combined with chanting, drumming exercises would lead to predictable trance states. So never mind whether we agree. Felicitas Goodman. Anyway, um, she thought that our ecstasy deprivation was one of the things that led to a lot of drug addiction, a lot of sex addiction, a lot of attempting to get it. And I'm bringing that back. The reason I brought her up is because of that awe deprivation
Mm-hmm.
that I think exactly leads to a lot of the things we see. And that makes me want to bring up the society of the spectacle and this notion that um, what was the line? Being becomes having, and having becomes owning. And also this notion that if you remove the emotional and relational content from something, it tends to get boring and then has to be more and more spectacular
Mm-hmm.
and more spectacular um, until it's uh, I mean, at one point it would have been good enough to simply play a sport. And then after that, when it becomes a spectator sport, we're no longer involved. That's still interesting for a while. But then you have to add TV. It's not an event, it's not a spectacle you go to. Instead, it's something that's on the TV. Then that gets boring. You got to add a jumbotron. You got to add halftime events. You got to add instant replay. It just has to keep getting more and more extreme. And I can either say one more thing about that or we can go on to another topic. Either way, it's your call.
Jennifer, what do you got?
Well, I want to get back to animism for a second because I think if we, in fact, approach the world as if everything is alive or a living being, then there's no shortage of awe and wonder, right? And I'm curious, Derek, what you think. It seems that people are afraid of that worldview. And what do you think that's about?
Well, I think we're afraid of the worldview, and I think also it would make everything we do impossible. That
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
our whole way of living is based on perceiving the world as consisting of resources as opposed to other beings to enter into relationship with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot easier to kill 1 million board feet of timber than it is to kill all of those trees whose lives are as valuable to them as yours is to you and mine is to me. And it's the same, it's easier to kill, you know, a billion pounds of chicken than it is to kill all the individual chickens.
Mhm.
And we have made ourselves believe, and we have created an entire epistemology based on this notion that nobody but us is really fully meaningful and alive. I
Mhm.
think, and so this is not a, I'm not a big believer in like the great man theory of history. I think that history created Hitler as much as Hitler created history. I think there's
Mhm.
this interesting interplay. And so I don't want to just blame the great chain of being for all of our problems because it took people who believed in a great chain of being to articulate the great chain of being. And I think the great chain of being is a big problem. And the great chain of being is this scale of perfection where you have God at the top, basically, who is completely disembodied and pure mind. And then below that, you have the angels. Then below that, you have men. Below that, you have women. Below that, you have non human animals, then plants, then various types of soil. And this is a scale of completely disembodied and perfect
Mhm.
at the top, and completely embodied and imperfect at the bottom. And humans are a battleground. And this is this this permeates everything about how we perceive the world.
Mhm.
And one example of that would be if I were to ask you what are the greatest five inventions of all time or the greatest inventions, you might say the lever, the screw, the pump, gunpowder, I don't know what, the wheel. And the interesting thing is that those were all created by human minds. And on the other hand, what about metabolism? That's a pretty cool invention.
Photosynthesis. Yeah.
Photosynthesis, sex, sexual reproduction, pretty amazing invention. But those never count because they were created by mindless earth. Or if I say, what are the most beautiful pieces of art? And I do the same thing. Somebody asks me just off the top of my head, and I'm not being political and snarky or anything. It's what are the most beautiful pieces of art? Oh, Beethoven's Ninth, uh, the Sistine Chapel, Mona Lisa, whatever. And what about the song of a hermit thrush? What about sunset? What about the trees? Well, this is a coniferous forest, so we won't see much of it. But I saw a few trees turning color the other day. It's beautiful. And I remember interviewing Neil Evernden back in 1992, and he wrote The Natural Alien, great book. Anyway, I said, "Wow, I drove up here, and he was in Toronto. All the trees are it's like they're showing off or showboating or something." You say, why do you say it's like they are? Maybe they are showing off. Maybe they are, maybe they're doing this to be beautiful. And but we don't consider that art. And we don't consider even those of us who take this on still, it's our second language to think about non-humans having and then I hate the word anthropomorphize because that's when you project human emotions onto non-humans. And so when I say, well, that tree doesn't want to die, as you're anthropomorphizing, why does it desire to live? First off, how do humans own that? And second, how do you know that the tree doesn't want to live? And I mean, trees certainly have defenses. We can get into that discussion if you want. And and also one last thing about the whole anthropomorphism thing before I drop it is that um, it's so funny. The same people who tell us not to anthropomorphize uh, have no problem talking about ecosystems, which is machine language, as
Mhm.
opposed to natural communities.
Mhm.
And they have no problem talking about, uh, the blind watchmaker who is running the universe. The whole. I mean, Dawkins has done some very good work in some ways, and The whole selfish gene thing, though, is simply a projection of a machine onto the natural world.
Right.
And you can't get any more anthropomorphic than to project a creation of a human being onto wild nature. So, back to animism. Why are we so afraid of it? I think I think one reason we're afraid of it is because if we truly accepted that everyone else, the fly you swat, the the tree you cut down, the tree you don't cut down, if we were to accept that they have lives as valuable to them as yours is to you and mine is to me, it would change everything about our entire way of living. And that
Hmm.
doesn't mean you can never kill a fly. You know, we all die. What it means is just a recognition that you just took a life. You didn't simply, uh, solve an annoyance. And I think there's no way we could be killing the world. And I think that's one of the reasons that we refuse to acknowledge it is if we really acknowledged the beingness of others, we would have a huge, we would have to recognize what we've done and
Hmm.
are doing. And we would have to, uh, acknowledge that somewhere along the way we made a really, really big mistake.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also we'd lose access to ice cream 24/7, which I'm making a joke, but I'm not making a joke
Yeah.
because, Mumford talked about that magnificent bribe about as to we, why we don't change. He wrote this in the 60s is why do we not, even though we can all recognize that everything is being destroyed, why do we not resist? And he says, because we have access to luxuries that emperors 500 years ago or 100 years ago could not have dreamed of. Instantaneous communication. We're in three parts of the world speaking instantly. And it was extraordinary. I mean, we didn't have that when we were kids, even.
Hmm.
And I was, I did a talk about the collapse of civilization in Budapest at a conference, pretty cool. A big conference all about people who are recognizing that this system's not sustainable. And it was a bunch of scientists and sociologists. It was great. It was so great to be in this community where if you say, we don't have infinite energy, nobody laughs at you or gets mad at you. It's like they pull out the numbers, they pull out the charts and you know put them up on the overhead. And anyway, so we had this, and the place they rented for it was this old palace in Budapest. And one of the comments I made there was that every single person in this audience has far more luxuries than the guy who built this palace and the guy for whom this palace was built. Um, and that's one of the reasons that we don't want to acknowledge this is because, and it's not just ice cream 24/7. That's an easy and cheap one to poke at. But I have Crohn's disease, and Crohn's disease would have killed me without modern medicines. And um, and I want to be clear. It's interesting. I interviewed years ago, and I'm going to say something bad about somebody. I interviewed Theodore Roszak, who had written some really good books, very good books. But what I didn't know is that in the time between when I'd read his earlier books and when I interviewed him, he'd just written another book in which he changed his mind on everything because open heart surgery saved his and his wife's lives.
Hmm.
So he all of a sudden, instead of going, "Oh, all this technology is so bad," it's like, "Wow, it saved my life. It's great." And so he had changed his mind, and it's like the benefits that you individually receive from a society are not the measure of a society's overall morality and worth. And the fact that civilization's keeping me alive, I mean, as long as it's here, I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of that. But um, I'm going to go one more direction, then I'll shut up. That I used to get some crap from Buddhists when my first couple books came out because they said you're too attached to the salmon. You need to just recognize that you need to practice Buddhist non-attachment, and that you need to not really it not matter to you. And it took me a while to figure out that that's completely wrong. Non-attachment to your own life is really important because, of course, we're all going to die. But that doesn't apply to the larger animals. And what we should practice non-attachment to is car culture, where yes, I will take advantage of it as long as it's here. And but when car culture goes, it goes. And I will take advantage of the modern medical system as long as it's here. But when it goes, it goes. And I don't feel that way about redwood forests. If redwood forest goes, there goes my heart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's
Nice.
funny you say that because so I'm a doctor of Ayurvedic medicine, and I believe people should let go of because modern medicine is so destructive to the planet in so many ways, and the earth-based and nature-based systems of healing are very powerful, especially for health promotion and prevention, which our healthcare system is really a disease care system. That's how you make money, is have sick people. So we don't maximize in any way health promotion and prevention. And I don't know, I am personally a proponent of letting go of things before they die out because they're not going to die out unless we let go of them. So, and I think it's interesting too. You were talking about the great chain of being, which was a very Christian kind of, the way that you elaborated it. And in Ayurvedic medicine, you have, these two um, manifesting energies of Purusha and Prakriti. And from there are the natural elements, and you get consciousness before you get matter. And then, human beings are comprised of the five elements and a stream of universal consciousness that is individuated. And so it's a very different, sort of great chain of being, if you will, which doesn't in any way contain all the contradictions that are contained in this other kind of version of it. So I just think it's interesting that again, there's um, if we can shift our lens, and animism is one way. We have so many options, to attend to polycrisis. And I looked at one of your books, and I kind of got this sense because you were talking about denialism, and you didn't actually say it this way, but I kind of got this the way I took it was that it's a trauma response,
Sure.
that disbelief is like a survival strategy. And I thought that really rung true for me when, I don't know if that's what you meant, but that's the way I perceived it. And I thought, yeah, that actually makes sense to me.
Well, thank you. And what's the question?
Uh, the question, well, I guess we can pivot to a question, which is that I know you wrote the foreword for Columbus and Other Cannibals, and I'm just curious what you have to say about Jack Forbes, or for that matter, I know you interviewed Vine Deloria. I don't know anything you want to say about those very smart men.
Well, one of the things I like about Columbus and Other Cannibals is that I've much of my work is attempting to figure out ways to explain why any species who considers itself intelligent would destroy the basis for life on this planet. That I think my favorite joke I've ever told in any of my books is that when they were giving us our Latin name, Homo sapiens sapiens, they added the second sapiens to make sure we'd get the joke. And um, every effort I make to try to describe to understand the I mean I can understand that if you're only looking at immediate benefit, that yeah, it's nice to have access to industrial electricity so that I can run a refrigerator, so I can have access to my ice cream 24/7. I understand how us acting that way collectively can add up to a big problem. And I understand how all of these technological systems are linked, such that if you have a mine, you have to force people off the land to make the mine. You have to have a police force to protect the smelted ore. You have to have a border system to prevent people smuggling the ore. You have to have all these social things that come with it. I get all that, but it doesn't alter the fact that when I was in second grade, they put in a subdivision next to where I lived, and I understood, I didn't know this language, of course, but I understood viscerally that you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. I mean, I got that when I was in second grade. So none of the stuff I write about is really cognitively challenging. So I've explored, is it psychological? Is it social? I've explored on the level of movement of resources. In my book Dreams, it's like, are there cosmic forces that are trying to, battle? It's like that book's a just giant thought experiment. It's like, is it just because we think humans, but it's not even because we think humans are special, because even if you are, even if all you care about is humans, we are clearly making hell on earth for the generations that follow. And you can have the New York Times will talk about how humans might go extinct within 100 years. And then you have all these people talking about how AI may cause humans to go extinct. And it's like, it would be smart not to play with those things if they could actually cause, if you care about humans. And so this finally brings us to Jack Forbes, that the book Columbus and the Cannibals for me was another way to try to make sense of the complete insanity that we see around us. And what I took from his book was that the problem might be that there is a spiritual illness with a physical vector that causes the people who are sick to have to consume the souls of others. And so it's the idea of the problem being this illness is one way for me to attempt to understand, well, for me through reading his book, to understand how we could be doing this. There is a sort of madness that has
Mhm.
overtaken us, and I don't, I've written 28 books on this, and I don't understand it at all. It's baffling to me. So Forbes, that's why I wrote the introduction to that book, is because I read that book and it's like, well, this makes as much sense as anything, because it is stunning to me that people. So I posted this thing on Facebook. Yeah, Facebook, whatever. I posted this thing on Facebook a while back that said, all it said was, recent studies have shown that fertility levels in India are below replacement level. That's it. And I said, some good news for once. And
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
I got attacked by so many people. I wasn't saying this is not that they are forcing abortions. This is not infanticide. This is just people having fewer children. And in this, and if we can't, or to take it a different direction, um, I live in the rural West, and I have my whole adult life. And there have been fights here, very hard political fights, to try to keep off-road vehicles off of a particular stretch of beach during the time of year when a certain endangered species nests on that beach. We have been fighting like hell for that and not getting anywhere for the most part. All that we're asking is don't ride your ORV on that particular beach for that particular time, and they won't give it up. And that's just a no-brainer. We can't even. My point is, we can't even stop the no-brainers.
Hmm. The low
And
hanging fruit, we won't even do that. Yeah.
golf courses use more water than municipal human beings. Municipal golf courses do. It's like if I was in charge of the economy, like that's the thing I do on the first day. I like baseball, but retractable stadium roofs? Are you crazy?
Yeah.
An air-conditioned stadium in Arizona? I was like, this is nuts. Or what about ice skating rinks in Florida? It's like, and we can't even energy use, for all the talk about global warming, energy use continues to rise.
Yep.
It's like, so Jack Forbes helped me understand that. And I don't know if Jack Forbes is correct. I don't know if it's spiritual illness with physical. I don't know what it is. I just know it's there. I just know that there is this madness upon us and madness within us collectively. And I'm willing to throw ideas out in any direction that might help explain it.
Well, that's a good jumping off point for my next question because I'm really curious about how we see ourselves now. And I listen to the language that's out there, and I read the comments sections in various websites when there's any kind of environmental story. And I hear more and more misanthropy and more language talking about Homo sapiens, talking about us as being a virus, a cancer, cities as tumors. We are an infestation, a pathogen, a parasite, an invasive species, a plague, a foreign object, an evolutionary dead end. I mean, what are we to make of this language and this explosion of this? I hear it more and more now. And is this just the inverse of human supremacy? Is this a failed way to think of ourselves? How do you manage that?
Well, first, I think it is pretty clear. I'm going to pick on one of those and then we'll talk about the others. I think it's pretty clear that we are an evolutionary dead end because this way of being is not going to last. And uh, we, for 100,000 years or 250,000 years or a million years, we're not an evolutionary dead end, but this way of life is maladaptive. And it's really hard because, and I'm just going to be honest. I mean, my greatest strength is sincerity, and I I used to feel really strongly that the problem was purely cultural, and I read John Livingston's Rogue Primate when I was about 30 and disagreed with a lot of it. And when I interviewed him, one of the things he said is that our fatal flaw really, and I disagreed with this at the time, but I have come to agree with it more. Our fatal flaw was relying on culture instead of instinct, and as a species. And one reason I disagreed with that is that it's very clear to me that the humans don't have a monopoly on culture. Birds speak dialects. They're I believe bears have cultures. I believe
Jim.
cows speak in dialects. But I'm going to gloss over that to what I think is the real problem. The real problem is that humans have the capability of developing really bad cultures. Eric Fromm wrote about, and what's her face? Oh gosh. Uh the really famous female anthropologist from the 50s, 40s and 50s who did how there are good cultures.
Margaret Mead.
No, it's not her. It's she was the teacher of Abraham Maslow. Anyway, Ruth Benedict. Um, Ruth Benedict also did studies of why some cultures are good cultures and why some are bad cultures. Peggy Reeves Sanday overlooked why she studied why some cultures are high rape and some are low rape, blah, blah, blah. And so what we know, and Eric Fromm in The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness laid this out beautifully. What we know is that some cultures, some human cultures can be very warlike, very aggressive, very treat women and children poorly. Other cultures can be very peaceful. Okay, so we all accept that, right? That some cultures can be pretty aggressive and some cannot. And part of the problem that I see is that has sort of moved me. I still recognize that humans live without destroying everything for quite a long time. So I don't think humans are a plague species. But one of the problems is that if a culture, say, develops agriculture, and then this culture converts the land base into human beings and converts the land base into weapons of war, it will have a choice. It either has to expand or collapse because it has permanently lowered the carrying capacity by turning all the productivity into humans. The problem is they then have a competitive advantage over their neighbors who didn't do this because they have the weapons of war that they made by cutting down the forest. So North Africa used to be heavily forested. That all went down to make the Egyptian and Phoenician navies.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that once you have one culture that, for whatever reason, turned to being very aggressive and very hostile, then their neighbors have a choice. When they invade, the neighbors have a choice. They can either fight, in which they become traumatized and warlike, or they can flee, in which case they run into their neighbors who probably don't want them there because they're already living at carrying capacity. And we end up with more conflict that way. And in any case, fleeing leads to trauma. Trauma often leads to a different sort of person who is oftentimes going to be collectively more militaristic. So my point is that I think it is possible for humans who were in some form of isolation to remain more or less peaceful and sustainable forever. But I think once you get some cultures turn, that's going to create this cascading uh, wave of traumatization that goes out.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, that cascading wave of traumatization could only go as far as either an impassable mountain or an impassable ocean, or as far as your logistics train could take loot back to the center of empire.
Mm-hmm.
There was a physical constraint on how big your empire could be. We've blown through all those constraints.
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay, so I actually perceive, again, I don't perceive humans as a plague species. I perceive us as having become something almost unrecognizable to those 20,000 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
with uh, a reliance. Lewis Mumford would argue that we've given ourselves over to the machine and sort of become machine-like ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we could have that discussion. But now to answer your question, I think that I am not bothered by the comments claiming that we are a plague species, or you know, I'm on team virus or any of that stuff. I don't complain at those because I think that they are a basic, the first step in any addiction is to recognize that there's a problem. and I think it's a misidentification of the problem, but I think it is a recognition that there's a problem. So I perceive this as a good first step of recognizing there's a problem, and then we need to step in and modify the discourse. Is any of this making any sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the problem is that as more people study biology and more people think of the biosphere as a living organism and compare it to the human body, some of these things are just inevitable. And I see more and more people talking in these terms, and it's really dark, and it feels like a depressing dead end in our discourse. And I think we need a better way to talk about ourselves. And maybe we need leadership in that. I don't know, but
Well, we can, I think. So let's begin that discussion right now. So you, so Ed Abbey said that growth is the logic of cancer.
right.
And I think we would all agree with that, maybe, but I would agree with it. But in any case, so I'm right now going to go on Facebook and I'm going to comment on yet another article about how, you know, orangutans are in big trouble. I'm going to go comment right now to say, yeah, humans are a plague species. So you, Frank, convince me not to do that. Make the better argument. Make the
Because
distinguishing argument.
that's the end of our conversation. If we see ourselves in that, and if we're going to be creative in any way, we're going to have to see ourselves with some path forward, some potential for goodness. And all these disease metaphors, I think, lead us nowhere. So what's
Okay,
what's
so
the
what's
better
the
idea?
so what's
Well,
the
I mean,
path
human
forward?
beings are a keystone species, right? We're part of the whole functional system. So far, we've been quite destructive, but some traditional communities would say that collapse is part of the process. That it's not, it's it comes when things have gotten too big, but it's not actually an endpoint. It's then a transition to something else, right? So I think there's a certain amount, I guess, that of this that is philosophical, um, but in that regard, I'm I'm have practiced a lot of Buddhism myself and agree with the Buddhists. Like, there is the necessity to depersonalize some of this and think about it as there are natural cycles of things, and sometimes that it comes with death. It comes with some things that are very unpleasant, but it doesn't. It doesn't have to be, just chronically framed as negative,
Mhm.
right? Um, I mean,
I
we
think that
know
the
in nature
destruction of
that
the
death
salmon is
leads to
negative.
regrowth.
There's no way you can reframe that. I refuse to
Well, I mean,
reframe.
well, you can refuse. Some traditional communities say, like, actually, I think it was even Vindeloria who said this, who said that, extinction happens and then sometimes those species come back. It's about regenerating the habitat that would allow them to come back. So this it's a mindset, I think, in a worldview, that allows for the possibility of something positive coming from something negative, and for something that looks final to be actually a transition to something else. I think it's just it's we have the opportunity to view things that way if we choose. And yes, we can like miss all the things that the animals and the aspects of nature that are being destroyed. But I agree with you, Frank. I don't think seeing humans as a cancerous species, in this whole thing is very helpful. I mean, certainly that's not the case. It's more the structures that humans have built that are very problematic, that need to be undone. Um, then it is something innately wrong with humans. Yeah, I think.
Right. I think it makes maybe more sense to talk about cancerous narratives or invasive cultures or stories that are plague-like, you might say. I think that's something we can get our hooks into, and then we could actually do something about. Um,
Right. It's ways of being, right? It's
right.
behavior, it's ways of being, it's ways of being out of relationships, it's ways of being out of, integrity with ourselves or integrity with the natural environment. But ways of being are perfectly, pliable. It takes, passion, commitment, effort, hard work, and sometimes, even with all that, you don't get the result that you're looking for. I'm with you. This kind of fatalism is not my preferred. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Or
No, I've
nihilism. I
never
mean, how do how do we talk to young people? Because you can't use these cancer metaphors with young people. I mean, that's going to kill their spirit, and
mhm,
we need them to keep doing something
mhm.
great.
Yeah, we
And,
have to start talking about life. I mean, even in these narratives of collapse, there's a way to frame it from the perspective of life rather than death, I think.
you know,